The moment I saw Mark, he was sitting across the bar nursing a bourbon and staring blankly into the middle distance. He's the kind of guy who looks like a stock photo for reliable. Six-figure salary, owns his own place, meticulous about his diet and his investments. He'd just been dumped, and he was devastated, utterly confused. "I don't get it," he finally said, pushing his glass across the table. "She said I was everything she was looking for in a husband. We were talking about granite countertops." Granite! Then she tells me there's no spark, packs a tiny bag, and flies off to Thailand with some 25-year-old bartender she met 3 weeks ago. He paused, running a hand over his neatly trimmed beard. The bartender, get this, barely has 2 pennies to rub together. He doesn't even have health insurance. I mean, I train for marathons. I volunteer at a dog shelter. I'm the good guy. I'm the smart choice. Why does the good guy always lose to the reckless one? The sheer earnest bewilderment in his eyes wasn't just about his ex. It was the confusion of every stable, kind, and dependable man who has ever been told he's perfect on paper, only to watch the woman he cares about sprint into the arms of a human red flag. He was trying to appeal to her logic, offering her a secure future, a perfectly built nest. But what he didn't realize, and what most men miss, is that when it comes to the deep currents of attraction, her brain might be shopping for a minivan, but her biology is screaming for a Ferrari. That disconnect, that brutal ancient chasm between what women say they want and what their deepest biology responds to, is the single biggest source of frustration for men today. It's not a moral failing. It's a survival mechanism millions of years old, and it's called the dual mating strategy. And if you don't understand it, you'll be Mark, sitting alone, wondering why stability isn't the most attractive thing in the world. Okay, let's unpack this. Our mission today is a deep dive into that exact disconnect, what the science calls the dual mating strategy, or DMS.
That's right. And it's a concept that can be really counterintuitive at first.
It seems to fly in the face of everything we're told about relationships. So we're going to explore the evolutionary roots of this. I mean, where did this even come from?
Exactly. We need to trace the ancient trade-offs that, kind of forced women to optimize for 2 very different goals at the same time.
And we'll get into the biology too, right? The neurobiological triggers, the hormones.
Yes, the hormonal shifts are a huge part of the puzzle.
Yeah.
And then we'll look at how the modern world, especially the economy, is sort of reweighting what men bring to the table.
And finally, look at the actual data cross-culturally. That helps explain why a woman might consciously, genuinely want that stable partner, but her instincts are pulling her somewhere else entirely.
And just to be clear, this isn't about placing blame. It's not a moral judgment.
Not at all. It's about understanding the fundamental operating system of human mating psychology. So let's start at the beginning, the evolutionary roots.
Okay, so when we're trying to understand these choices that seem, well, paradoxical, like the one Mark's ex made, we have to start with this fundamental evolutionary trade-off.
I think most people's understanding of this probably starts and ends with Robert Travers' theory, right? The parental investment idea.
It's certainly the foundation. And for decades, it was, the main lens we used.
The idea being that because the biological cost for a female is so massive, the pregnancy, lactation, all of it, she's naturally going to be the more selective sex. She'll want one single committed partner.
That was the core prediction. And it holds up in a lot of ways. Travers' theory correctly predicted that women, with their greater initial investment, would focus on long-term bonds. They need protection, they need resources.
While men with a much lower investment threshold would be more open to short-term variety.
And for a long time, the research, which was mostly self-report surveys, it all seemed to confirm this really tidy picture. Women said they wanted fewer partners, they valued commitment, and they did the majority of childcare.
But the story of Mark, and, countless others, suggests it's not that simple. It suggests women are maybe not as universally coy or single-minded as that model would have us believe.
And that's the critical shift in the modern science. We now see so much variation in behavior in both sexes. It challenges that old stereotype. The research now shows that females are incredibly flexible, they're opportunistic, they're constantly facing these reproductive dilemmas where the best choice changes depending on the context.
Okay, so let's get into that core dilemma. You said ancestral women had to solve 2 separate problems for reproductive success. What were they?
Right, so success isn't just about having a baby. It's about having a baby that survives to adulthood and can reproduce itself. And to do that, you need to solve two problems that were often at odds with each other.
Okay.
Problem one is what we call securing high-quality genes. You can call this G1. This is about finding a mate whose physical traits, like prowess, symmetry, pathogen resistance, all suggest he has a really robust genetic blueprint to pass on to your child.
The best possible biological starting material.
Exactly. And problem two is securing provisioning and protection. This is about finding a mate who is willing and, just as importantly, able to stick around, commit his resources, and physically protect you and your offspring during that incredibly long, vulnerable period of human childhood.
I see the conflict already. The guy who's displaying all the markers of superior genetics, the dominant alpha, the risk taker, the one winning all the fights. He's often not the same guy who's going to be motivated to, stay home and share his food and build a stable nest.
That's the crux of it. The men who excelled in those two domains were often mutually exclusive. You had the high variance, genetically superior male who might be unreliable, and then you had the reliable provider who is maybe average, genetically speaking.
Right.
And this conflict is the absolute bedrock of the dual mating strategy.
So let's define that strategy, the DMS, really clearly. How does a woman pursue both of these tracks at once?
Well, the theory posits that she's essentially running two mating programs simultaneously. Track one is for the long-term partner. This is the provider, the father.
A minivan.
The minivan, exactly. He's chosen for investment, for commitment, for resources, for protection. He secures the nest. He's reliable, safe, comfortable.
And track two is where the trouble starts for guys like Mark.
Track two is for the short-term partner, the gene carrier. He's sought often through what we call extra care copulations, or EPCs affairs, purely for his superior genetic quality.
The Ferrari.
The Ferrari. High performance, exciting, looks amazing, but it's completely impractical for raising a family. This strategy, in theory, allows a woman to get the best of both worlds, the safety net of a committed partner, plus the genetic upside from a superior male.
And you see this in nature, right? This isn't just some weird human thing.
Oh, absolutely not. It's a classic strategy. You look at socially monogamous bird species. The female pairs up with a reliable male who's a great nest builder. He'll feed the chicks, defend the territory, a solid provider.
The good guy.
The good guy. But she'll frequently fly off to a neighboring territory to sneak a copulation with a more physically dominant, maybe more attractive male. She's hedging her bets, ensuring her clutch has the best possible genes, even while her main partner is doing all the parental heavy lifting.
So the fact that this happens across species suggests it's a really ancient, deeply embedded adaptive logic. It's not a conscious choice. It's a program running in the background.
That's a great way to put it.
Okay, so that covers the genetic benefits, the G1. But I think you mentioned that multiple mating can also provide direct material benefits. It's not always about a genetic upgrade.
That's right. The benefits really do fall into two categories, genetic and material. On the genetic side, as we said, it's about finding mates who might be more resistant to local pathogens, for example.
Which would have been a huge deal in our ancestral past.
A massive deal. And it's interesting, some research shows that in societies with very high pathogen stress lots of diseases, you're more likely to see polygynous systems. It might be a better bet for a woman to share one high-quality, disease-resistant man with other women than to have exclusive access to a low-quality man who might be sickly.
So a high environmental threat actually dries up the value of those G1 traits.
It absolutely does. Now, on the material side, you have this idea of increased access to resources and support. A woman might form bonds with multiple men, not just for sex, but for the actual tangible support they provide. Food, gifts, protection for her and her children.
Which leads to this idea of an insurance function.
Yes, the insurance function is incredibly powerful. Multiple mates can dramatically reduce the risks that come with, say, ecological uncertainty or the dissolution of a primary partnership, which could happen through death or abandonment.
And there's a really striking real-world example of this, the idea of partible paternity.
Yes, in some South American societies. This concept is just fascinating because it's so alien to our Western model of exclusive fatherhood.
So break it down for me. How does that work in practice?
Well, in cultures like the Bari people, there's a cultural belief that a child is literally built from the accumulated semen of multiple men. So a child can have several fathers, all of whom contributed to their physical substance.
And this isn't just a belief, it translates into a survival strategy.
Correctly. The woman receives food, gifts, and support from all of the men who are considered fathers. And the crucial finding from anthropological studies was that children with multiple acknowledged fathers had a much, much greater chance of survival.
How much greater?
In some groups, up to an 80% higher chance of surviving past infancy compared to children with only one acknowledged father.
Wow. That's a staggering difference. So the culture essentially formalizes the insurance policy, the uncertainty of who the genetic father is, which usually decreases male investment.
Right, because of paternity uncertainty?
This turned completely on its head. Here, it actually promotes investment from multiple men because each one has a stake in the child's survival.
Exactly. It's a formal, community-wide social contract designed to maximize resources for the child. It just shows how flexible these strategies can be, and that the ultimate goal is always the same: secure the best genes and the maximum resources for survival.
This makes the story about Mark even more complex. His reliability, six-figure salary, those are top-tier signals of being a good provider and father, but he's operating in a world of incredible stability. She's not worried about starvation or disease.
He's offering more of what she likely already has access to. The insurance policy he represents has a much lower premium in a modern wealthy society, which ironically makes his core value proposition less essential.
And that means other values, like that G1 spark, might get weighted more heavily.
It can, yes. The entire calculation changes.
So it's not just a behavioral strategy, it's actually built into our physiology. Let's talk about the biological nuts and bolts that make this dual strategy possible.
Right. If this is a deeply evolved strategy, then human female physiology has to have adaptations to facilitate it. And we see two really big ones: concealed ovulation and continual sexual receptivity.
Concealed ovulation has always struck me as, well, inefficient. Most other mammals broadcast their fertility loud and clear. It seems like a strange thing for evolution to hide.
It is a paradox on the surface. But when you look at it through the lens of the DMS, it starts to make a lot of sense. One of the leading theories is that by concealing ovulation, you confuse paternity.
How does that help?
Well, if a male can't be certain when the female is fertile, he can't be certain he's the father. This could reduce the risk of infanticide, which was a real threat ancestrally, and might encourage multiple males to invest or at least tolerate a child because it could be theirs.
It's a biological version of the partible paternity strategy. It's creating uncertainty to broaden the investment pool.
A very good analogy.
Yeah.
And then you add continual sexual receptivity. Most female mammals are only receptive to sex during a very specific, obvious window of fertility, or estrus.
But human females aren't like that.
Not at all. The capacity and desire for sex can occur across the entire cycle. This makes it much, much harder for a primary partner to successfully mate guard. It lowers the cost and increases the opportunity for those extra pair copulations we talked about.
Okay, so the physiological stage is set. This brings us to the core conflict, the thing that really creates the drama for guys like Mark, the ovulatory shift hypothesis.
This is the central prediction of the DMS. If a woman is running this program to secure high-quality genes, and she can only conceive during a very brief window each month,
then her psychology should be fine-tuned to really zero in on those good genes guys during that exact window.
That's the idea. The hypothesis says that as estrogen peaks right around ovulation, women should experience a strong, instinctive, and often subconscious shift in their preferences.
Yeah.
They should suddenly value those good genes qualities much more heavily.
Even if those qualities are the exact opposite of what makes for a good long-term partner.
Especially then. That's when the conflict becomes most apparent.
So what are we talking about specifically? What are these traits that suddenly become so attractive?
We're talking about markers of high genetic quality, things that often function as costly signals.
Meaning they're hard for a male to produce or maintain, so only the healthiest, fittest guys can pull them off?
Exactly. So physically, we're talking about things like a very masculine facial structure, a strong jaw, prominent brow ridge. We're talking about physical symmetry, a low-pitched voice, and just general physical attractiveness.
Okay, the deep voice one is interesting. Why is that considered a costly signal?
Because a low voice is linked to high levels of testosterone. And high testosterone is actually an immunosuppressant. It slightly weakens the immune system.
So a man with a really deep voice who is also healthy is basically advertising.
He's advertising, my immune system is so robust, I can afford the handicap of high testosterone and still not get sick. It's an honest, hard-to-fake signal of genetic quality.
And behaviorally, how does this shift manifest?
Behaviorally, women show increased preferences during this fertile window for males who exhibit things like social dominance, confidence, and a propensity for risk-taking.
Which, again, are great traits if you're looking for a guy who can win competitions and rise in status.
But terrible traits if you're looking for a reliable, patient, and faithful co-parent. Outside of that specific genetic context, arrogance and risk-taking can signal selfishness and a lack of commitment.
This is where we bring in the anecdote about Sarah. She has her stable partner, Ben. He's the minivan, the granite countertops guy.
He's the guy her conscious brain chose for the future. He's kind, he's committed, he's reliable. But when her estrogen is peaking, her ancient biology starts screaming for a different kind of signal.
And Ben, the ultimate good guy, is probably agreeable, maybe a little conciliatory. He's not a chest-beating dominant type.
His traits signal low testosterone, high cooperativeness, wonderful for a partnership. But they don't scratch that ancient G1 itch, and then Jax walks in.
The loud, arrogant, dominant guy at the gym, the Ferrari.
Jax is a walking, talking, costly signal. He's probably a terrible long-term bet. But during that brief, fertile window, Sarah's biology doesn't care about his 5-year plan or his relationship with his mother. It only registers his potent genetic signals. And she feels this intense, confusing pull toward him, and maybe even a flicker of resentment toward Ben for not being that.
It's a complete cognitive dissonance. Her mind and her body want two different things, but I know this is a contentious area of research. How solid is the evidence for these ovulatory shifts?
That's a very important caveat. The theory is very elegant, but the empirical data is, well, it's messy. Some meta-analyses have found some support. For instance, women near ovulation do tend to spend more on their appearance, which suggests an increase in mate-seeking effort.
But the specific preference for, say, a more masculine face.
That's where it gets weaker. Large-scale studies have really struggled to consistently replicate that specific finding. The effect, if it exists, might be very subtle, or it might not be as simple as we think.
So it's not necessarily that women just want a caveman for 3 days a month.
It seems not. And there's another powerful alternative interpretation, which is the idea of self-perceived mate value.
Okay, what's that?
The idea is that when a woman is at her peak fertility, she subconsciously perceives her own mate value as being at its absolute highest. She is, for that brief window, the most valuable reproductive asset she can be.
And so her standards go up across the board. It's not just about wanting a more masculine guy.
Exactly. The theory is that her bargaining position improves, so she raises her standards for everything. She wants a man who's more attractive, yes, but also one who's smarter, richer, kinder, and more committed. She feels she has the leverage to demand the whole package.
She wants it all.
She wants it all. And this is actually consistent with what we know about highly attractive women in general. They already have higher standards for all traits, not just good genes. Ovulation might just temporarily put all women into that high mate value mindset.
That's a really important distinction. It shifts it from a narrow biological craving for one thing, G1, to a broader strategic elevation of all her criteria.
And it fits better with another piece of the puzzle. Infidelity. If the goal of an affair was purely to get good genes, you'd expect affairs to cluster exclusively around ovulation.
But they don't.
They don't. We know that relationship dissatisfaction is a huge predictor of female infidelity. And when women are unhappy, they often report attraction to other men across their entire cycle. This suggests that infidelity is often less about a quick genetic grab and more about a strategy of mate switching.
She's shopping for a replacement.
She's shopping for a replacement long-term partner. The biology is part of the story, for sure, but the behavior is heavily modulated by how happy she is in her current relationship. The ancient systems are still there, but they're interacting with the complex realities of modern relationships.
Which is a perfect segue into how we classify and value male traits today. Let's talk about the 3 Gs.
Right. To really understand the modern landscape, we need this framework of the 3 Gs of male mate value. How women prioritize these reveals everything about the disconnect men like Mark experience.
So let's just quickly review them again.
Okay. Good genes, G1. This is the oldest, most primal category. Traits that signal fitness, health, dominance. The benefits are intangible, realized at conception.
The Ferrari is enter.
Perfect.
Okay.
Then, good providers, G2. This is about indirect paternal care. Resources, protection, money, ambition, status.
The minivan safety rating and cargo space.
Exactly. And finally, good fathers, G3. This is the newest evolutionary path focused on direct paternal care. Alloparenting. These are the traits like kindness, patience, faithfulness, and a genuine willingness to change diapers and do school runs.
The guy who actually helps you load the groceries into the minivan.
Yes, and for most of human history, the focus was almost entirely on G1 and G2. The preference for a good provider, G2 in particular, is just undeniable in the research.
Universal, right.
It's about as universal a preference as we've ever found in psychology. Across 37 different cultures, across decades, women consistently and robustly value financial prospects, ambition, and status in a long-term partner. And this isn't just what they say they want. It translates to actual reproductive success. Historically, marrying a man with more resources meant more of your children survived.
But in the modern developed world, the value of that G2 starts to decline, at least relatively. And that's where we see the rise of the good father, G3.
That's the key shift. In a modern industrialized society with high gender equality and economic stability, a woman's reliance on a man for pure provisioning for G2, it just drops dramatically.
This is our Alina character, the high-earning corporate lawyer. She's got her own six-figure salary. She can buy her own house, her own granite countertops.
Right. The provider role becomes redundant. When Elena is already financially secure, the marginal utility of a male partner's high income is much lower. A man offering her financial security is like, as you said, offering a cup of water to someone standing in a river. His G2 value proposition just isn't that compelling anymore.
So if she doesn't need his resources, what does she need? What's the new bottleneck to her reproductive success?
It shifts from indirect provisioning money to direct labor, time and effort. As women have their own demanding careers, what they need is a true partner, a helper at the nest. The logistical and emotional burden of raising children in the modern world is immense.
School runs, doctor's appointments, homework help, managing screen time.
It's a full-time job on top of a full-time job. And this makes those G3 qualities, a demonstrated willingness to put in the time and energy of direct care, the single most valuable resource a man can offer in a long-term partnership.
And we have data that shows this preference shift happening in real time.
We do. There's a really compelling study from China that compared women in modern urban areas with women in more traditional rural areas. The urban women, who have more economic independence and education, they prioritized good father attributes, G3, significantly higher than G2 or G1.
What were those G3 attributes they were looking for?
Things like being kind, faithful, wanting a family, and being patient. The affiliative cooperative traits.
This suggests that modernity isn't getting rid of the need for a high-value partner. It's just completely redefining what high value means. The exciting G1 guy, the Ferrari, is often selfish and uncooperative by nature. He makes a terrible co-parent.
You've hit on the key trade-off. Those G1 traits, dominance, risk-taking, are often intrinsically linked to negative G3 traits like selfishness and dishonesty. So if a modern woman is trying to optimize for a functional two-parent household, she has to actively screen against the pure G1 carrier.
Which brings us back to the tragedy of Mark. He's a perfect G3 man. He's kind, stable. He volunteers at a dog shelter, for crying out loud.
Right.
He's also a great G2 provider, but he was missing that G1 spark.
And that G1 spark is a cheap, immediate biological thrill. G3 is a complex, long-term promise of cooperative effort. Mark's stability was exactly what her conscious, logical brain wanted for her future. But the bartender, that human red flag, was broadcasting a raw G1 signal that her ancient biology couldn't ignore, and that internal conflict just blew the whole thing up.
Okay, so let's look at how this all plays out in the real world. The actual behaviors. This isn't just a fixed identity, it's a flexible strategy. And this is where the mate-switching hypothesis comes in as a really powerful explanation for female infidelity.
Yes. For a long time, the only lens for female infidelity was that good genes model, a quick genetic upgrade. But the mate-switching hypothesis reframes it as a much more strategic, long-term move.
So it's not just a fling. What are the tactics involved?
Well, there are several. The most straightforward is trading up, leaving your current partner for someone of a higher overall mate value. Yeah. Maybe he has better genes, more resources, and is a better father prospect, the whole package. Another is cultivating a backup mate. This is that insurance function again, keeping someone on the back burner in case your primary relationship fails. And then, probably most commonly, it's about using an affair to facilitate divestment. The affair is the catalyst that gives her the emotional momentum to leave a relationship she's already unhappy with.
This fits perfectly with the data we talked about earlier. That relationship dissatisfaction is a much stronger predictor for female infidelity than for male infidelity.
The divergence is huge. For men, infidelity is often driven by opportunity and a desire for novelty. For women, it's far more often driven by a strategic assessment of what's lacking in her primary relationship.
It's an audit. And if the audit fails, she starts looking for a new firm.
That's a very good way to put it.
Yeah.
And this brings us to that David and Lisa scenario. Lisa consciously chose David as the endgame partner. He was the kind, committed, stable G3 provider.
But she treated him more like a co-manager, a business partner.
The passion wasn't there. He was a wonderful investment vehicle, a great future father. But he didn't trigger that deep biological attraction. So she felt safe, but she also felt profoundly empty and restless. And that dissatisfaction is what opened the door for an affair.
And the crucial point here is that when she has an affair, she's not necessarily looking for Jax, the gym guy. She's often looking for a better version of David.
Exactly. When you ask women what qualities they look for in an affair partner, they often list things like dependability, emotional stability, success, and intelligence. She's screening for a replacement husband, not just a sperm donor.
And this is where that incredible statistic comes in, that something like 79% of women who have affairs report falling in love with their affair partner.
Compared to only about a third of men, that 79% figure is just devastating to the pure good genes model.
Because falling in love is a bonding mechanism. Yeah. It's for long-term partnership.
It's the psychological software for long-term pair bonding and cooperative child rearing. If the goal was just a quick genetic exchange, falling in love would be a massive evolutionary mistake. It would risk the stable investment from your main partner for no reason. The fact that the vast majority of women form these deep emotional attachments proves the affair is a serious audition for a new long-term partner.
It's a test drive for a full relationship upgrade.
Precisely.
So how does this mate switching manifest in different cultures? Let's look at some of the real-world data.
Well, the most obvious form of mate switching is divorce and remarriage, and that freedom is a key way women exert choice. But look at a society like the Himba, where marriages can be arranged.
Okay.
In arranged marriages among the Himba, the rate of misattributed paternity, a direct measure of infidelity, was about 9%. But in love matches, where the women chose their own partners, the rate was 0.
Wow. So infidelity becomes the tool of choice when actual choice is constrained. If she's free to choose up front, she picks a guy she's happy with and stays faithful. If she's forced into a match, she uses infidelity to exercise her preference.
That's the clear interpretation. And you see other conditional strategies based on the economy. In developed nations, when the economic prospects for men are poor, say high male unemployment or a skewed sex ratio with too many women, you see higher rates of premarital births.
So the strategy becomes, I can't count on a reliable, high-investment partner being available, so I'll prioritize reproduction now while I'm young and worry about the long-term investment later.
It's a conditional bet. It's investing in short-term mating when the long-term market looks bleak.
But I have to play devil's advocate here for a second. If this whole dual mating strategy is so powerful and so prevalent, why is the actual rate of misattributed paternity in modern countries so incredibly low?
That is the essential challenge to the theory, and it's a really important one. The meta-analyses consistently show the non-paternity rate is somewhere between, say, 1.7% and 3.7%.
Which is very low. It means that over 96% of the time, the dad on the birth certificate is the biological dad. So if this powerful biological urge exists, why isn't it translating into behavior more often?
Well, it suggests that while the psychological and biological potential for the strategy is always there, the attraction to G1 traits, the restlessness, the actual execution of the strategy is held in check by some very powerful forces.
Like the consequences.
The consequences are immense. The risk of getting caught, which could lead to the loss of your primary partner's investment, social ostracism, even violence, is a massive deterrent. And secondly, as we've discussed, the main adaptive benefit for women in affairs often isn't the genetic upgrade. It's testing a new partner or securing more resources.
So most of the time, the woman runs the numbers, consciously or not, and concludes that the guaranteed long-term investment from her stable partner is worth more than the risky, fleeting potential of an affair.
Exactly. The DMS exists as this constant background psychological tension. But for most women in stable modern societies, it manifests as restlessness and desire, not as actual behavior.
So, to wrap this all up, let's look at how the context, both personal and societal, shapes these final choices. And it starts with a woman's own status, her own mate value.
Right, and it's pretty straightforward. Women with higher mate value, women who are younger, more attractive, they simply demand more of everything. They have the leverage.
They're the ones who can realistically get a guy who scores high on all 3 Gs.
That's what the data shows. They elevate their standards across the board. They want the G1 attractiveness, the G2 resources, and the G3 parenting skills. They effectively want it all because their high mating capital allows them to be that selective.
And on the flip side, men with high status are the ones who get to realize their own preferences, which have always been for youth and attractiveness.
That's one of the most consistent findings in all of psychology. High status, high resource men are far more successful at marrying younger, more attractive women. You can see it in speed dating studies today. Women of all socioeconomic levels preferentially select men who have higher income and education. Status for men is the currency they use to access reproductive value.
Which brings us to the final fascinating puzzle, the gender equality paradox.
This is where things get really interesting. There was a theory, biosocial role theory, that predicted as societies became more gender equal, these sex differences in mate preferences should shrink.
It makes logical sense. If women are earning their own money, they shouldn't need to prioritize a man's resources anymore.
That was the prediction. But that's not what the data shows.
What is so?
When you look at massive cross-cultural studies across 45 countries, including the most egalitarian societies on the planet like Sweden and Norway, the universal sex differences remain incredibly robust.
So even in Sweden, women still prefer men who are older and have better financial prospects, and men still prefer women who are younger and more attractive.
They do. Now, gender equality does change behavior. The actual age gap between partners tends to get smaller in more equal countries. But it doesn't really change the underlying preference.
So wait, if a woman in Norway is a CEO and can provide everything for herself, why does she still have a preference for a man with high financial prospects? What is that preference really for, if not the money itself?
This is the heart of the paradox. It suggests the preference isn't just a response to economic need. It's a much deeper, evolved psychological mechanism. Financial prospects at that level are no longer about survival. They're an honest signal of competence, intelligence, ambition, and the ability to navigate complex social hierarchies. Those qualities are valuable in a partner no matter how much money you have yourself.
It's an evolutionary residue, a deep-seated instinct that just persists even when the original reason for it is gone.
Exactly.
Yeah.
And this brings us right back to Mark, sitting at that bar. He was making a perfectly rational appeal to her conscious modern brain.
He was offering her everything she said she wanted, the stability, the commitment, the G2 and G3 qualities. He was the perfect solution to the problem of building a modern family.
He was. But her conscious mind was in a battle with her ancient biology. That deep instinctual programming, the one that's tied to her hormonal cycle and the ancient need for G1 signals, it was responding to something else entirely. Dominance, status, risk.
And this is the ultimate conflict, what you call the irrational rationality.
It is. The woman's desire for a stable, kind G3 partner is completely rational. Her deep biological thrill at the G1 traits of the reckless bartender is also, in its own ancient way, rational. The tragedy is that these two rationalities are in direct conflict. The man feels betrayed because he thinks she lied. But she didn't lie. She really does want what he offers. But she also feels this confusing, overwhelming, and often devastating pull in another direction, and she doesn't understand why.
So we've explored how this dual mating strategy, which is driven by these ancient pressures for both good genes and good provisioning, continues to operate under the surface of modern life.
We have. We've seen how economic development is shifting the focus from the good provider to the good father, and how these deep instincts for genetic quality can show up as that fleeting, disruptive attraction, even in a happy relationship. We've seen even as societies become more equal, these core evolutionary preferences seem to remain remarkably stable.
The core challenge, then, for modern women is trying to synthesize all of these competing needs into one partner. And the tragedy for a man like Mark is offering a solution stability, in a world where that solution, while still incredibly valuable, isn't the only thing her biology is shopping for.
The ultimate measure of modernity may not be when we eliminate our ancient mate preferences, but rather when we develop the emotional complexity to appreciate that the safety required for successful parenting is a far rarer and more valuable long-term resource than the temporary thrill of superior genes.